Hi, I'm Ruehl. I teach philosophy at St. John Fisher College, and I'm going to be talking about social change and Indigenous history and wisdom. I want to begin with a land acknowledgement. I live on the traditional land of the Seneca Nation, the keepers of the Western Door, and the original peoples of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy: Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, and Seneca. I want to acknowledge the Seneca community, their elders both past and present, and future generations. I also acknowledge that most of the institutions in the United States were founded upon the exclusions and erasures of many indigenous nations and peoples, including those on whose land I now live. This acknowledgement demonstrates my commitment to the process of dismantling the ongoing legacy of settler colonialism and the doctrine of discovery. I'm invested in the introspective work and concrete actions to decolonize our communities and our institutions. When we think about social change in the context of the United States, it's a sad reality that for the most part, social change and indigenous nations and peoples aren't even connected. They remain invisible in such conversations. The same is true when we talk about race, class, gender, and healthcare issues. Social justice very rarely turns to the welfare of indigenous nations and peoples. I think it's time that we start paying attention more to our indigenous brothers and sisters. It's time to start paying attention to how U.S. history has affected them and continues to shape their lived realities. But I would also like to say this: there is a lot to learn from indigenous wisdom, and I think that anyone who is looking to transform the context and culture of the United States needs to be a little bit more mindful and aware and educated on the wisdom that our indigenous brothers and sisters have given to the world. When I finished Pagans in the Promised Land by Stephen Newcomb, I came to think about the United States as a large crime scene. And I realized how important images and metaphors were for shaping how we think about our actions and change. And in the Crime Classification Manual, in Chapter 10, they talk about group cause homicide. And basically, group cause homicide is linked to various ideologies, religion, ideas of race, economic ideas. And those ideas and laws, etc., let one group of people enact their rage and basically murder another group of people or violently assault them. And so for me, this idea of group cause homicide was very important, and the underlying ideology that allowed the U.S. to become a large crime scene and allowed group cause homicide to occur is the doctrine of discovery. The doctrine of discovery emerged from papal bulls or papal decrees in the 1300s and 1400s. And basically what these papal bulls said is that the church had ultimate authority over all human beings, and only through the church could you have salvation. Now also these papal bulls authorized the discoverers to go into non-Christian lands, to take those lands, to try to convert the pagans, and even to end up killing these people who are called enemies of the faith. These ideas from the papal bulls made their way into Manifest Destiny, which highly shaped Supreme Court rulings, and it also shaped how U.S. citizens went west and took land from indigenous peoples because they thought it was their God-given right. And so basically behind all of this is the idea of Christian supremacy. I want to turn to the lasting impact that the doctrine of discovery had on indigenous peoples. An example is the Taino people. By 1514, roughly about 97% of them had been killed off, and so scholars generally agree that depopulation occurred at a rate between 90 and 98%. So they take a rule of thumb at 95% depopulation, which means that in the end, approximately 1 out of 20 people survived. But this killing of indigenous nations and peoples also went hand in hand with the idea of killing off the natural world. And so in the picture that's on this slide, these are basically bison skulls from the massive killing of 30 to 40 million bison in the mid 1800s. So the idea of Christian supremacy linked to the doctrine of discovery and then also in manifest destiny had a very violent effect on both human and non-human beings in the Americas. But the doctrine of discovery has had a lasting effect on the Supreme Court and its decisions. So when we go back to 1810 all the way to 1955, we see ruling after ruling that turns to the doctrine of discovery. And basically, these decisions help to undermine sovereignty. They help to support the idea of Christian supremacy, as the European nations were Christian nations who conquered pagan peoples. And you also see then that the idea of taking land becomes okay and sanctioned by the Supreme Court through these decisions. And all of them turn back to this idea of Christian conquerors and also white Christian conquering nations to support the dispossession of indigenous nations and peoples of their land and their sovereignty. And in a nation, as Stephen Newcomb talks about, as a nation grounded on the separation of church and state, it's amazing that the U.S. Supreme Court continues to turn to the doctrine of Christian discovery to justify its rulings. The doctrine of discovery is not a thing of the past. It came into the 21st century in the Supreme Court decision concerning City of Sherrill v. Oneida Nation of New York in 2005. Justice Ginsburg delivered the opinion, and in the first footnote, she turns to the doctrine of discovery to justify the court's ruling. And so what we see then is that the Supreme Court, the people in the United States, and the nation as a whole continue to think about its relationship with indigenous nations and peoples through the idea of the doctrine of discovery. We are a conquering nation. The idea of Christian supremacy is there even in the Supreme Court decisions. And so in a country that wants to establish the separation of church and state, we have to start really questioning this idea of the doctrine of discovery and how it shapes Supreme Court decisions. When we talk about the doctrine of discovery and manifest destiny, we can't forget the boarding school experience. In the United States, we created boarding schools that often forcibly took indigenous children away from their families and tried to instill in them Christian values. From 1877 to 1926, the government continued to pour money into this project. By 1885, about 25% of indigenous children had been affected by the boarding school experience. By 1926, about 83% had been affected. This was a project that was intended to, as the saying goes, kill the Indian to save the man. It was an attempt at cultural genocide. And so to talk about social justice, to talk about social change without remembering this long history of the doctrine of discovery, manifest destiny, the boarding school experience, and how it has shaped indigenous families and indigenous people today is very myopic. To talk about social change and social justice, we need to be very mindful of this long traumatic history that has shaped the lived realities of our indigenous brothers and sisters. I want to turn to indigenous wisdom. I do not pretend to be able to do justice to the great wisdom of indigenous peoples, but as I've read about indigenous history, I think I find three affirmations. Relatedness. We're all relatives, Vine Deloria Jr. tells us. We are related to every other human being, and we are related to every non-human being on this planet, and we have to take those relationships seriously. The second affirmation concerns politics guided by sustained peace. The Haudenosaunee have a great tradition of peace, guided by the peacemaker, and how they came to see that in their important decision-making processes, they had to think for the seventh generation to come. This is a lasting peace. So it would be good if social change would not only start to focus on all of our relatives, but also on a lasting, sustained peace that is going to be present in 7 generations to come. The third affirmation concerns gifts and an ethic of preservative care. I want to read this quote from John Mohawk. "The world does not belong to humans. It is the rightful property of the great Creator. The gifts and benefits of the world therefore belong to all equally. The things that humans need for survival, food, clothing, shelter, protection, are things to which all are entitled because they are gifts of the Creator. Nothing belongs to humans, not even their labor or their skills, for ambition and ability are also the gifts of the great Creator. All people have a right to the things they need for survival, even those who do not or cannot work, and no person or people has a right to deprive others of the fruits of those gifts." End quote. And so basically then we have been given a lot. We should be grateful for it. But we should not hoard our gifts. We should use our gifts in a good, responsible way for the benefit of others too and all creation. So in Indigenous thought, the wisdom that I take away is that we have to start focusing more on our relationships. We have to think about a lasting peace. And we have to think about an ethic of preservative care that seeks to nurture and preserve the gifts of ourselves and others. I'd like to end with these thoughts. If we fail to really consider how the history of the United States has affected indigenous nations and peoples, we will have a very narrow understanding of social justice and social change. In fact, if we don't take account of the Doctrine of Discovery, Manifest Destiny, the boarding school experience, what will likely happen is our sense of justice will continue to be a sense of injustice for indigenous peoples. So it's time to broaden our conception of what it means to have social change, to have justice, and it must be connected with a deep understanding of the traumas our indigenous brothers and sisters have experienced. But I also think that it's time to learn from our indigenous brothers and sisters. It's time we think more deeply about our relationships to the human and non-human realms. It's time to think more clearly about what a lasting peace would be, a lasting peace that will extend 200, 300 years into the future. But it's also time to think about the gifts that all of us have and what we can bring to society and to the world to make it a better place. It's time to nurture those gifts in a more responsible, respectful way. I want to thank you for letting me come and share my ideas with you. If you would like to see a fuller account of these ideas, please go to the link below and you can find my journal article there from which I drew these ideas. Thank you, and may you live in peace.